Rich Mill despised me simply because I come from a modest background. In a spiteful bid to embarrass me, she orchestrated a cruel prank at her party by falsely introducing me as her housemate, and then shamelessly posted the whole debacle online. Before you get too deep into this wild tale, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. It really helps me get my message out there. Now, let me walk you through every twist and turn of this story in vivid detail. Let me introduce myself. I'm a 28-year-old woman who has been married to my dear husband Harry, who is also 28, for the past 2 years. Harry and I share a long history together. We first became friends during our college days, and it wasn't until after we graduated that we discovered our deep connection. Family that struggled financially, my parents had to work tirelessly to support me and my 3 sisters. We grew up with very little. My father worked as a janitor while my mother juggled multiple odd jobs to keep food on the table. Despite our struggles, I take immense pride in our background and the values instilled in me by my hard-working parents. My siblings and I have never felt ashamed of our roots. In fact, we celebrate the honest labor and perseverance that defined our upbringing. From our very first dinner together, it became painfully evident that Olivia harbored a deep-seated disdain for me. The moment I casually mentioned that my dad had been a janitor and that my mom often ran errands for those with means, her face twisted into an expression of disapproval. Although she never directly insulted me in person, her behavior spoke volumes. At every dinner she hosted, she deliberately maintained a physical distance, as though she feared any association with me, and she even went so far as to use different sets of silverware and less attractive plates for my use compared to those reserved for her and Harry. At first, I tried to brush off these subtle cues, thinking I was reading too much into minor details. But as more incidents unfolded, it became unmistakable that Olivia's behavior was driven by classism. On my birthday, for instance, while she lavished Harry with an extravagant, expensive watch and even sent her assistant on a lavish all-expenses-paid trip to Bali for 3 days, she gave me nothing more than a cheap knockoff purse bag that barely set me back $85, and to make matters worse, she left the price tag attached. It was then that I realized I wasn't imagining things at all. She clearly resented me. In hindsight, my greatest misstep was not confiding in Harry sooner about these hurtful instances. I had experienced discrimination before, but never from someone I hoped to build a familial relationship with. Before witnessing her true colors, I actually admired Olivia, partly because I aspired to launch my own business someday, and partly because Harry had spoken so highly of her. My sisters and I, all finance majors who managed to attend college through student loans and hard work, were proud of our achievements. I work in marketing and advertising, but I have dreams of creating something extraordinary on my own. For these reasons, I desperately wanted a harmonious relationship with my future mother-in-law. I hoped that in time, she would accept me, but as the awkwardness grew and her subtle barbs accumulated, I felt increasingly marginalized. After a few months of marriage, I finally mustered the courage to tell Harry that I felt uneasy visiting his mother, as her behavior left me feeling inferior and constantly reminded me of my humble origins. Harry, always understanding, promised to speak with Olivia and try to resolve the tension. He did approach her, but instead of accepting any fault, Olivia launched into a tirade of vehement denials, complete with crocodile tears, insisting that she had always been warm and welcoming. That reaction only confirmed my suspicions. She was manipulating the situation to suit her own narrative. Although I appreciated Harry's efforts, I still couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort around her. We eventually agreed that while Harry could maintain contact with his mother, I would keep my distance until I was truly ready to engage with her again. Of course, I was painfully aware that as his wife, I would inevitably be dragged into her orbit, and Olivia's disdain for me was now an open secret. Despite our attempt to settle into a fragile peace, attending family gatherings where Olivia and I would merely exchange polite nods, a recent incident shattered any lingering hopes of reconciliation. A few days ago, Olivia sent me a text around noon, inviting me to her 50th birthday celebration and asking that I arrive a few hours early, claiming she wanted to amend things. In her message, she even admitted that I had been right about her past behavior and that she had been cruel to me before, and that she now wished to make amends. With a hopeful heart, I agreed and arrived early at the party, excited at the possibility of finally being accepted as part of her family. However, my optimism was short-lived. The moment I stepped in, she curtly instructed me to wait in the kitchen, a confusing and demeaning command. A little while later, Olivia emerged herself, introducing me to the party's waiting staff as her housemaid, in a tone dripping with sarcasm. To make matters even worse, she recorded the entire moment on her phone and burst into laughter, clearly reveling in the humiliation of what she considered a successful prank. The room was filled with uncomfortable silence, and I was so mortified that tears streamed down my face. Unable to bear the degradation, I bolted out of the house, jumped into my car, and drove home with a heavy heart. I had informed Harry about my visit to Olivia, but he was busy at work and hadn't checked his messages yet. Returning to an empty house and a silent inbox only deepened my sense of isolation, and I wept myself to sleep that night. A few hours later, I awoke to find Harry finally home, sitting beside me on the bed with his phone clutched tightly in his hand as he furiously typed away. When I asked him why he hadn't been at the party, he turned his phone around to show me a video posted by his mother, a video capturing the prank, skillfully edited to cut off just before my tearful breakdown, making the whole stunt seem only mildly objectionable at first glance. Nevertheless, the intent was unmistakable. Olivia had purposely humiliated me for her own amusement. Harry reassured me, promising that he was doing everything in his power to get the video removed. He vowed that he would stop at nothing until Olivia was forced to face the consequences of her actions. Although she wasn't answering his calls or texts at that moment, he was confident that it wouldn't be long before she called him, only to be met with a stern warning, a lesson she would not soon forget. Sure enough, about an hour after I had woken, Harry received a call from her. I can't repeat every word of that conversation, but believe me when I say it was as harsh as it gets. He ended the call with a promise to file a lawsuit against her for the emotional torment she had inflicted upon me. Later, while catching his breath after a furious rant over the phone, he apologized to me repeatedly, expressing regret that he hadn't taken stronger measures sooner when I first confided my discomfort. In all honesty, I can't fault him entirely. When I initially mentioned my concerns about Olivia, I had downplayed the severity of the situation, inadvertently giving him the impression that it wasn't a major issue. And while I had suffered in silence over numerous other incidents, his inability to pick up on them was not entirely his fault either. Still, once the party incident had finally pushed me to my breaking point, I told him everything, and he was livid. He berated himself for not acting sooner, apologized for not noticing how deeply his mother's actions hurt me, and even called his lawyer to see if there was any legal recourse for the emotional abuse I endured. Unfortunately, because there were no physical injuries to speak of, we couldn't file a lawsuit for emotional distress. I tried to convince Harry that we didn't need to pursue legal action, that perhaps cutting her out of our lives entirely might be the best solution. Yet, he wasn't satisfied with that idea. His anger on my behalf had spurred him to want to teach Olivia an unforgettable lesson. By the next morning, he had contacted her and delivered an ultimatum. Olivia had exactly 3 days to issue a public apology, not only to me but also to my entire family, and the apology had to be in video format. If she failed to comply, he threatened to expose her abusive behavior to all her business associates, a move that could irreparably tarnish her reputation as a respected female entrepreneur. I admit, this tactic felt disturbingly close to blackmail, and I expressed my unease to Harry. But he dismissed my concerns, insisting that this was the only way to ensure Olivia never repeated her behavior or dared to trouble me again. I can't help but worry that by letting him go after his mother so aggressively, we might be descending into a cycle of revenge that neither of us truly wants. A few days later, I sat Harry down after he returned from work, as many of you have suggested, to share my growing concerns once again. I explained that while Olivia was undeniably the antagonist here, I didn't want us to sink to her level just to force an apology from her. An apology, after all, would likely be hollow and insincere, given her track record. I pleaded with Harry to call off his plan and to tell Olivia that she didn't owe us anything. As long as she kept her distance, that would be enough. To my surprise, instead of meeting my request with resistance, Harry broke down in tears. I spent several minutes comforting him before he was finally able to articulate the deep-seated guilt he felt for not addressing Olivia's behavior more seriously from the start. As many of you have pointed out, he was overcompensating for his earlier inaction by trying to exact revenge on his mother, rather than truly listening to my perspective. I admitted that I was not naturally assertive, often feeling too submissive to stand up for myself. Our conversation eventually led him to text Olivia, informing her that there was no need for any apology because he had decided he no longer wanted any relationship with her. I must say, I felt a swell of pride for both of us for managing to present a united front against the toxicity that had plagued our lives. Our bond, our us versus the problem mindset, was stronger than ever, and we agreed that seeking marriage counseling was now imperative to address the issues that had festered for far too long. I've already started looking into counseling options, and I plan to begin working on our marriage soon, determined that we must never relive the anguish of those past days. I'm relieved that Harry is taking such a definitive stand against Olivia, even if I secretly fear that his actions might lead to more chaos down the road. Then, after a week had passed since the disastrous party, things took another dramatic turn. Olivia had been eerily silent since Harry's ultimatum, not attempting to contact us or make amends. We began to think that perhaps this tumultuous chapter was finally drawing to a close. However, today, out of the blue, she arrived at our doorstep accompanied by her lawyer. When I opened the door, she strode in without so much as a glance in my direction, calling out for Harry as if I were invisible. In our own home, where we should feel safe and in control, she behaved as if she owned the place, ordering Harry to come with her to the living room. Harry, who had been in our bedroom moments before, was forced to heed her demand, though I had already told him to expect this kind of drama. When he appeared in the living room, Olivia commanded him to sit on the couch, a display so brazen and condescending that it made my blood boil. Harry calmly informed her that he would do as he pleased and that he had no desire to engage with her at that moment. Yet, Olivia was relentless. She insisted that he take a seat so that he could listen to what she had to say. Sensing the need to reclaim our home, I joined Harry on the couch, clearly asserting that our house was not hers to commandeer. Even though she chose to ignore my presence, I wanted to make it unmistakably clear who was in charge here. Then, without any further preamble, Olivia called her lawyer forward and had him read aloud the terms of a document she had prepared. In essence, the document stated that if Harry did not leave me immediately, she would amend her will to exclude him, allocating her entire fortune, assets, and even real estate holdings to other family members, her employees, and charitable causes. This list of properties and assets seemed designed solely to terrify him by highlighting what he stood to lose by remaining with me. Throughout the lawyer's reading, Harry appeared unfazed, nonchalantly fidgeting with the ring on my finger, as if the threat were nothing more than background noise. When the reading concluded, Olivia demanded that Harry consider his future carefully, ominously warning that if he stayed with me, he might forever forfeit any claim to her inheritance. Then, in a moment I can hardly describe, Harry stood up, walked directly toward his mother, wrapped his arms around her in a big, heartfelt hug, and softly whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." Her expression shifted instantly from smug triumph to utter shock, and I couldn't help but giggle at the unexpected reversal. Enraged, Olivia finally acknowledged my presence with a curt command to shut up, launching into a tirade filled with a string of choice insults that I won't repeat here. I remained silent, purposely ignoring her venomous outbursts, knowing full well that engaging would only further fuel her anger. Even Harry, ever the peacemaker, did not argue with her. Once her tirade subsided, he leaned over and suggested that we retreat to our room to avoid witnessing any further public humiliation, since it was painfully clear that his mother was spiraling into a full-blown meltdown. As we walked away, our whispered conversation in the hallway was as if she were not even present, a quiet defiance against her chaotic intrusion. Just as we began to feel a sense of relief, Olivia escalated matters by accusing me of being a gold digger. She insisted that she had never approved of our marriage and that she had always known I was only after Harry's money, implying that, given my father's modest janitorial career, I was somehow unworthy of him. I calmly but firmly retorted that her baseless accusations were not only offensive but entirely untrue, reminding her that I was a self-reliant working woman who had never taken a penny from Harry. I then warned her to leave my house immediately before I was forced to call the police. With that final command, she stormed out, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and regret. Although the visit was utterly unpleasant, it forced a few long overdue truths into the open, and I hope it will deter her from ever trying to interfere in our lives again. Not long after that turbulent episode, I received another shocking development. About 2 weeks have now passed since her intrusion, and Harry and I had begun to believe that the worst was behind us. We were slowly resuming our normal lives when I got a distressing phone call from my parents. They told me that Olivia had unexpectedly shown up at their home, and the visit was anything but cordial. She had barged in unannounced, hurling insults at them, denouncing them as terrible parents who had raised a gold-digging, conniving version of me. The barrage of insults did not end there. She further berated my mother, accusing her of neglecting to properly raise me by spending too much time running errands and earning money rather than being at home. In a particularly cruel moment, she insulted my father yet again by demeaning his profession, reiterating that he was unworthy of providing a decent life for his daughters. My parents were nearly reduced to tears as they recounted every hateful word she uttered. The thought of her yelling at my parents, disparaging everything we held dear, fills me with uncontrollable rage. I'm currently at work and can't intervene immediately, but once my shift is over, I'm determined to march over to Olivia's house and confront her head-on, no longer willing to let her disrespect my family. I did text Harry as soon as I heard the news, though he was preoccupied with his work, so I haven't received a reply yet. Even though I'd prefer to face her alone this time, I made sure he was in the loop so he wouldn't be blindsided if she called him later, likely in tears over all the terrible things I had said. Now, fast forward to the most recent update. I'm sitting at home after returning from yet another explosive encounter at Olivia's house. This time, the confrontation was even more intense. I arrived about 3 hours ago, and I can honestly say that letting my pent-up anger out was one of the most cathartic experiences of my life. When I opened her door, Olivia greeted me with a self-assured smirk, as if she expected nothing more than my submission. But that smirk was the last straw. I lost control of my composure. I pushed past her, storming into the living room, and demanded to know whether she had visited my parents and unleashed her venomous tirade upon them. When she admitted it, almost proudly, I couldn't hold back any longer. I screamed at her with every ounce of my being, and I swear the entire house shook from the force of my voice. I demanded to know how she could be so heartless and how dare she insult my parents in such a manner. Despite my normally quiet and soft-spoken nature, traits that I have always guarded, I found a reservoir of strength within me that I didn't know existed. I proceeded to call her a hypocrite and a pitiful excuse for a human being, condemning her for her complete failure as a mother, for putting her own bitter pride ahead of Harry's happiness, and for deliberately trying to tear us apart. I even went as far as to say that I was relieved her late husband had passed away when Harry was a child, because I doubted he would have survived another minute under her oppressive thumb. I compared her to the worst possible affliction, worse than any disease Harry might have suffered, and that comparison brought her to tears. But I didn't stop there. I continued yelling for several more minutes, unleashing every bit of pent-up fury until I finally ran out of steam. At that point, Olivia was sobbing uncontrollably, and despite the chaos, I couldn't help feeling a grim sense of satisfaction at finally seeing her break down. It felt like justice for all the time she had belittled me and disrespected my family. After venting my heart out, I left her house in a storm of emotions and drove back home. An hour later, Harry arrived. He explained that he had left work earlier, mistakenly thinking I was still at Olivia's, and that when he finally arrived, he found her curled up on her couch in tears. I braced myself for his anger over what I had done, expecting him to be upset with me for causing his mother's breakdown. Instead, he enveloped me in a warm hug, expressing pride and relief that I had finally stood up for myself. He apologized profusely for all the times his mother had wronged my family and shared that in a brief conversation with her, he had made it clear that this was probably one of the last times he would ever speak with her. He reiterated that if she dared to cross the line again, we would be forced to seek a restraining order. When he pressed her about the specifics of what I had said, she shamelessly repeated everything, even recounting the unkind remarks about his father. Olivia expected him to rally to her side, to defend her honor, but instead, Harry disappointed her once more. He calmly stated that while she might be referring to my comments about his father, what I said was completely justified in light of the far worse things she had inflicted upon my family. This exchange spiraled into another heated argument, with Olivia accusing Harry of favoring me simply because I appeared soft and submissive. He firmly countered, explaining that his loyalty to me was rooted in the truth of my words. He had never once intended to hurt her, but she had made it abundantly clear that she would always use every opportunity to demean and manipulate me. With that, Harry calmly left her house, even as she screamed for him to return, and declared that he had made his choice. In that bittersweet moment, we shared a small, tender exchange that reaffirmed our unwavering commitment to each other. We have since decided to continue with our marriage counseling, confident that our shared struggles have only strengthened our bond and that we will always have each other's backs, something I have always dreamed of. Every day brings new challenges, and Olivia's vindictive behavior continues to rear its ugly head. Just a couple of weeks after her destructive visit to our home, I received yet another phone call, this time from my parents. They were in a state of shock, recounting how Olivia had once again intruded into their lives. This time, she had barged into their house uninvited, unleashing a torrent of insults. She labeled them as terrible parents who had raised me to be nothing more than a gold-digging, conniving bee, and she continued to hurl hurtful comments about my character. Worse still, she berated my mother for not spending enough time at home nurturing me and even mocked my father's profession, reiterating her belief that he was unworthy of providing for his children. The pain in my parents' voices nearly brought them to tears, and just the thought of her demeaning them fills me with an uncontrollable fury. I'm currently tied up at work, but the moment I clock out, I plan to confront Olivia again, this time with the intent to make her pay for the disgrace she has inflicted upon my family. I've already texted Harry about the incident, though he's been caught up with his own responsibilities, so I haven't yet received his response. Despite my inclination to handle this confrontation on my own, I made sure to keep him informed so that he wouldn't be caught off guard if Olivia later tried to manipulate the situation through him. Now, here I am once again, recounting the latest chapter in this saga. I returned home from Olivia's house about 3 hours ago, and the sheer release of anger I experienced still sends shivers down my spine. When I arrived, Olivia was waiting, almost as if she had been expecting me. Her demeanor was one of smug assurance as she opened the door, but I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. Without hesitation, I barged into her living room and demanded to know if she had visited my parents and cruelly insulted them. When she confirmed that she had, and did so with a tone of self-satisfaction, I couldn't restrain my fury any longer. I screamed at her with such force that I swear the very walls trembled. I demanded to know how she could be so callous, how she could dare to insult my family, and I unleashed every bitter word I had held back for so long. I called her a hypocrite and denounced her as a miserable, sad excuse for a human being. I reminded her that she had utterly failed as a mother by choosing to prioritize her own petty grievances over Harry's happiness. And that her deliberate attempts to drive a wedge between us were doomed to fail because Harry and I loved each other deeply, something she could never understand. In a moment of searing truth, I even remarked that I was relieved her husband had passed away when Harry was just a child, for I doubted he would have survived another minute under her oppressive influence. I compared her behavior to the worst of diseases and let her know, in no uncertain terms, that her actions were reprehensible. As my voice echoed through the room, I watched as the mask of arrogance she wore crumbled, replaced by uncontrollable sobs. I continued my tirade for several minutes until I finally ran out of steam. Once I had calmed down, I left her house in a storm of emotions and returned home. Not long after, Harry arrived. He explained that he had left work earlier than usual, assuming I would still be at Olivia's, but when he got there, the door was ajar and he knew I had already fled. Entering the house, he found Olivia curled up on the couch, crying her heart out. I braced myself for his anger, expecting him to be furious that I had pushed his mother to tears. Instead, he embraced me warmly, expressing pride and relief that I had finally stood up for myself. He apologized for whatever hurt his mother had inflicted upon my family and recounted a brief conversation he'd had with her before returning home. In that conversation, he made it clear that this would likely be one of the last times he ever spoke with her. If she ever dared to cross the line again, we would be forced to take legal action. When he pressed her on the specifics of my accusations, she shamelessly repeated every single word, including the insults I had made about her treatment of his father. Olivia expected him to defend her and demand that I step aside, but Harry instead reaffirmed that my words were justified given her long history of mistreatment. This confrontation escalated into yet another argument, with her accusing him of favoring me merely because I appeared soft and unassuming. Harry made it perfectly clear that his loyalty was based solely on what was right, not on any misplaced sentimentality. In the end, he left her house with an unwavering declaration that he had made his choice, and that nothing could shake the bond between us. Even as she screamed and pleaded for him to return, Harry remained resolute, and I felt an overwhelming sense of unity and love that I had always yearned for. We continue to work on our relationship through marriage counseling, and though the road ahead may be rocky, we now know beyond doubt that we stand together, come what may. Each of these episodes has been a roller coaster of emotions, a tumultuous mix of humiliation, rage, sorrow, and finally, empowerment. Through it all, I have come to realize that my journey is not just about enduring the mistreatment of a classist, spiteful woman, but about reclaiming my self-worth and asserting my right to be treated with respect. I hope that by sharing my story in such painstaking detail, you not only get an inside look at the raw and unfiltered drama of my life but also find the courage to stand up for yourself in the face of injustice. Thank you so much for reading this long, winding tale. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and share this video for more updates and for the support of my channel. Your encouragement means everything to me, and I promise to keep bringing you every twist and turn of this incredible, albeit painful, saga as it unfolds.